start the meeting now. It's a work session of the Assembly on voting. Let's go around and identify ourselves for the team. Jennifer?
Jennifer Johnston.
Ernie Hall.
Patrick Quinn.
Dick Traney?
Sylvie Green Johnson.
Barbara Jones, Municipal Clerk.
Amanda Moser. Clerk's Office.
Okay. Amanda?
Actually, I've got a couple of
You?
comments real quick.
Okay.
Since Amanda and my committee, ethics and election, are connected.
You want to run the meeting then, Ernie, and I'll shut up?
There's not going to be a whole lot to run.
Okay. Go ahead, Ernie.
And actually, sharing with Patrick and Jennifer, the whole reason that we wanted to get this meeting together is the Elections and Ethics Committee has been working diligently moving to a mail-in election. And create a stakeholders group was created that Amanda is working very closely with. And, it's our intention before the end of the year basically to bring a resolution to the body in regards to going to a mail-in election in 2017. And Amanda is going out and meeting with some of these stakeholder groups and giving a presentation to them. And we did not want it to come back to an assembly member, somebody in one of these groups thought about, what's this about moving to a mail-in election? So we wanted the entire body to be aware of that, and now 2 more of you will be aware of it, mass that's not here. But Amanda basically is going to give you a presentation now, and actually, when she goes out and gives, it's excellent, I will tell you. So, Amanda, it's your show.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share the work that the Clerk's Office has been doing under the direction of Ernie Hall as the chair of the Ethics and Election Committee. Assemblymember Hall directed the Clerk's Office to explore ways to address some of the challenges associated with municipal elections. And the 3 main challenges that I'm talking about are our low voter turnout. We are typically around 20% for assembly member elections and fluctuates a little bit higher, closer to 30 for mayoral elections. But we are not engaging the bulk of registered voters here in Anchorage in these issues that impact their day-to-day lives. The second is that precinct-based elections are an inefficient use of community resources, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more as we go into the presentation. And third is one of the biggest challenges is the recruiting, training, and retaining election officials. We require over 650 election workers to run an election, a precinct-based model election. So really just our current model that we're using is unsustainable and costly. And in our research, we discovered that vote-by-mail jurisdictions have increased voter turnouts, they're more efficient at using community resources, and it centralizes processes which decreases the dependence on election workers. So before we move on, just to familiarize you with business as usual for elections here in the municipality of Anchorage, we serve 209,000 registered voters, and to serve these 209,000 registered voters, we have 122 precincts, and we hire over 650 election workers. As we talk about the municipality of Anchorage, it's really important that we talk about our geographic diversity. We stretch from Akutna down to Portage, and we have polling places from Peters Creek to Girdwood. We deliver equipment to these precincts. We hire a moving company, and they deliver, over 646 of the voting booths. Not only deliver, but deliver and set up. It's a massive project that takes the entire day before election day. So I mentioned earlier that an inefficient use of community resources, setting up these 122 polling locations requires 646 voting booths, 122 black ballot boxes, and 2,928 pens to be delivered to all these polling locations. So there's some inefficiency as we talk about the number of polling locations and the geographic diversity that we're dealing with in Anchorage. So before I get too much further into my presentation, I wanted to show a short video. It's 4 minutes long, and it just kind of gives a nice overview of what voting by mail means. This is from King County. King County is the second largest vote by mail jurisdiction, second only to LA. Los Angeles County is vote by mail also. And they've really sort of, in their short time of being a vote by mail jurisdiction, sort of honed in on some really great stuff. So I'm going to play this.
Voters in King County, we have one of the most convenient methods of voting in the country. King County, and now all of Washington, votes by mail, which means that we no longer operate traditional polling places. Instead, people can vote and return their ballots at a time and place that's convenient for them, usually from home. It also makes voting generally more accessible. Voters in King County receive their ballots and local voters pamphlets in the mail more than 2 weeks before Election Day. They may actually arrive on different days because sometimes they are mailed out separately. Voting begins as soon as the ballot arrives in the mail. This means you could vote and return your ballot well in advance of Election Day. Election Day is now the deadline for returning your ballot. Ballots must be returned to a ballot drop box by 8 p.m. on Election Day, or ballots can be returned through the mail, but they must be postmarked by Election Day. Ballots can also be returned to one of our accessible voting centers that you'll find listed in the voters pamphlet or on our website. We encourage voters to vote and return their ballots early. It helps us conduct elections more efficiently, and it also gives us a little extra time in case we need to contact you about any issues with your signature. With vote by mail, there are a few important things to keep in mind. When you receive your ballot in the mail, you'll notice that there are several parts to the packet. Your ballot, the security envelope, and the return envelope with the voter's declaration printed on the outside. It also may contain informational inserts, depending on the election. Keep track of all these materials. You'll need them to vote and return your ballot. As you get ready to vote, remember these tips. Read the voter's pamphlet and contact us if you have any questions about voting. The voter's pamphlet is also available in audio format on the King County Elections website and in other formats such as large type by request. Read your entire ballot carefully, top to bottom and front to back. When filling out your ballot, use a black ink pen. Never use a pencil and never use a color of ink other than black. Fill in the oval for your choice as completely as you can. If you have trouble with this, contact our office for other voting options. Place your ballot in the security envelope and then into the return envelope. Sign the declaration on the back of the return envelope. Try to keep your signature within the space provided. This is necessary for your vote to be counted. If you have difficulty signing your name, make a mark on the signature line and have 2 witnesses sign on the lines indicated for them. Return your ballot through the mail using a first-class stamp or at a ballot drop box. Drop box locations are listed online and in the voter's pamphlet. Remember, the deadline to return ballots is Election Day. Your ballot must be postmarked by that day or in the drop box by 8 p.m. The earlier you return your ballot, the more time we have to contact you in case there are any issues with your signature. If you lose or damage your ballot, or if you haven't received it within 10 days of the election day, contact our office for a replacement. Additional information is always available on our website, and you can always call the voter hotline for assistance during business hours. King County Elections offers options for people who may have trouble filling out a ballot without some assistance. Accessible voting centers are open during each election to support voters who need staff assistance or equipment to help them vote privately and independently.
Have they gone to electronic voting? Because I see everything just
I knew you were going to ask that question.
Jennifer, what did you ask? I'm sorry.
If they've gone for, I thought I read or that they were studying or going towards electronic voting or they were
Who's the?
King County.
It's my understanding that King County is still a vote by mail jurisdiction, and we have a few contacts with King County, and so we can definitely get in touch with them to see what they're exploring beyond that.
But you can see when accessible voting is electronic.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are voting electronically, and it is available.
No, really what I'd like to see us do is do this one in 17, but have another committee take a look at what's the next step beyond vote by mail, which has to be voted by computers, because you eventually we're going there.
Yeah.
I'd like to see what jurisdictions are doing the first steps on computer voting. The biggest thing is security, making sure we don't have a security problem. But it's so much easier just to pick up your phone, whatever you want to use, bring up the screen, be able to vote, and then somehow verify it's you and get it done that way. Speed things up a lot. I think but this is a good first step. Just vote by mail. Once we educate the kids on what stamps are. Yes, Patrick.
Amanda needs to finish her presentation.
I'm sorry.
Did you want?
Finish up, and
Okay.
I'll have a couple of questions.
So I think the video does a good job of familiarizing you with the steps to vote by mail. And how is it's important to talk about, there's 3 states that are currently full vote by mail: Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and quite a few jurisdictions also across the country. So as we're having these conversations with community members, most folks know somebody who is voting by mail. They have, a daughter in Seattle or whatever. So folks are familiar with this process. And vote by mail is the alternative to the precinct-based voting model in which official ballots are mailed to all registered voters and then returned back for counting. So vote by mail works that you receive your ballot, you vote your choices, and then you return your ballot. You can use the United States Postal Service. A 45-cent stamp is less expensive than gasoline, bus fare, or the time required off work to get to the polling location. You can use a secure drop box. Most jurisdictions locate them around the city, and that's something that we're exploring for Anchorage. Or, as you saw in the video, an accessible vote center, which is also something that we would have as part of a vote by mail model. And this is a great way to get help if needed, get a replacement ballot, or if you still want to have that experience of voting in a precinct, you would be able to do that at the accessible vote center. So under the direction of Ernie Hall this summer, the clerk's office began reaching out to community members with an interest in municipal elections, and we formed a municipal stakeholders group. We started with about 12 community members, and we really were looking at a lot of different things when we were choosing our community members. We wanted a leader in the business community, someone who could help us address some ADA concerns. We wanted to make sure we had an election worker who has a lot of familiarity with the process, someone with expertise in communications, marketing, outreach, the postmaster, someone with GIS expertise. So we started with 12, and since then our group has ballooned. We probably have closer to 50 members now. As we've begun reaching out to community members, a lot of times they have feedback as to other people that should be involved in this conversation. So we continue to reach out to folks and engage them in this process. The group has met twice so far, and the group has reviewed our current model and studied voting by mail, and the group continues to be involved and working and engaged in the process of moving towards a vote by mail model for Anchorage. So why are we talking about vote by mail for Anchorage? I think first and foremost, the increased voter turnout. Vote by mail jurisdictions do have higher voter turnout than regular jurisdictions, and I think it's just some statistics. In November of 2010, 2 states exceeded 70% voter turnout of their registered voters, Oregon and Washington. And the only other states that were close were Minnesota and Wisconsin. And those are both states that have same-day voter registration, which is another thing that statistically increases voter turnout. Vote by mail decreases cost per vote, as we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, with the resource-intense model of setting up 122 polling locations, hiring 650 workers. It does require a lot of municipal resources, and so a vote by mail model does decrease the cost by vote at the same time that it's increasing voter turnout. Vote by mail is proven to work. Oregon's been vote by mail since 2000. Washington, the entire state went vote by mail in 2011, and Colorado most recently went vote by mail in 2013. So millions of voters have been voting using this system. Vote by mail has no partisan advantage. It is increasing voter turnout, but researchers are really showing that it's increasing it across party lines. I think one of the most important things as we talk about vote by mail is the opportunity for voters to be educated on the issues. It flips the voting dynamic, and so instead of getting a ballot and going into the box, the voting booth, and then looking down and realizing that you have an encyclopedia written on your ballot, you have the opportunity to have the ballot at your kitchen table, research the issues, discuss them with your family members, and make the right choices. And that opportunity to be educated on the issues really maximizes voter confidence in the votes that they're making. Because we are no longer setting up the 122 polling locations, hiring 650 election workers, it introduces greater efficiencies in the process. It's taking a model that's sort of spreading things out across the city and just centralizes all the processes. Vote by mail is incredibly popular among voters who vote by mail. And if you look at the narrative in Oregon, Washington, and Colorado, there's some small dynamic where voters were exposed to vote by mail and really were the driving force between going full vote by mail. And so once voters get accustomed to it, they don't really want to go back to the precinct-based model. Vote by mail is secure. There is elements in place that allow the ballots to be tracked, signatures to be verified. Former Oregon Secretary of State Phil Keisling is quoted as saying, "What about fraud, coercion, stolen ballots, other election mischief? After hundreds of millions of ballots cast, the actual incidents in Oregon, and then only of individual voter fraud, can be counted on two hands." And so vote by mail is secure and it's accountable. With the technology, we are able to track the ballots as they go out and track them as they come back in. And then using signature verification equipment, verify that they are signed by the voter. So with our stakeholders group, we have formed 3 subcommittees. There's an education outreach, a procedures subcommittee, and a technical advisory. And there are some technical aspects of vote by mail that I think it's important to talk about. We have the volunteer technical subcommittee, and because voting requires specialized equipment and knowledge, we expect to have the technical subcommittee's input and opinions. However, we are recognizing that we may need additional assistance in this area, and maybe more than we can expect from a volunteer group. There's 3 major components to vote by mail that involve a departure from our current system. And these practices help address public concerns with fraud. So first, the signature verification. You saw a little bit of that in the video. All vote by mail jurisdictions use some element of signature verification to verify that the ballot is received from the voter and that that signature matches the signature on file in the voter registration database. Ballot tracking system. Most vote by mail jurisdictions use some barcode tracking system. And you might be familiar with this from having mailed a package or waiting for a package to arrive, that you're able to track where that package is at. Vote by mail jurisdictions use this same technology, and you're able to track your ballot. And last, an important component for Anchorage municipal elections is the ability to reconcile the voter addresses that are on file with the state of Alaska voter registration database versus the municipal tax districts and assembly districts, which really drive what ballot you're qualified to receive for municipal elections. So cost. As to the cost of the equipment for a vote by mail system, we are conducting research. We have been working closely with other jurisdictions that are vote by mail. We've developed a close relationship with King County in Washington, home to Seattle. We have a close relationship with Multnomah County in Portland, and we've been reaching out to both Colorado and Salt Lake City, who are some of the more recent vote by mail jurisdictions. We're not at a point where we're comfortable talking about a single piece of equipment that we are going to move forward with or that rises to the top, but we are continuously updating the Assembly Ethics and Election Committee on the work that we're doing, and we'll update the Assembly as new developments warrant or as the Assembly requests. So we are asking and looking for some additional volunteers for our stakeholder group, the Technical Advisory Subcommittee, because this is an area where it is expertise in these areas is really vital for both the signature verification, the barcode tracking, and the GIS component of it. So we will follow up on that with an email later. So just in closing, why do voters like vote by mail? And just an aside, I've been in the clerk's office since 2010, and this is probably the #1 request that we get from voters as they contact our office is why aren't we vote by mail, or why why do I have to fill out an application every year to request a ballot? Because we are not a full permanent absentee state. So this is something that we've been hearing over the years that voters really want the convenience of vote by mail. So why do voters like voting by mail? It's accessible, it's convenient, it's secure, it's accountable, but most important, vote by mail allows voters the opportunity to study the issues. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I am available if you have any questions.
Thank you, Amanda. We've been added by Mr. Bowski. Thank you, ma'am. LB and then Patrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. So I have a couple of questions. Okay, once the setup costs are established, it should be cheaper, less expensive. And I'm sure you don't have those numbers now, but I'd love to know what the elections have cost us as opposed to what they're going to cost us by going to vote by mail. And I think it'll be a really good selling point for those in our community. And I think it's a good idea. Also, the state's going to vote by mail, correct? Or the state,
Alaska?
Yeah.
We don't know that.
I've heard it, but you don't know. Okay.
I have not heard that.
Okay. If I can ask two more questions. One more question. The video showed that you have to use a black ink. Okay. What happens, because there will be some who won't use black ink, they'll use a pencil or green, whatever. Will those votes still count?
Excellent question. And some of the technology that we've been looking at addresses those concerns. And it allows, how do I say this? There's a component of one of the ballot scanners that we've been looking at that allows a reviewer of the ballot, if perhaps they use pencil or it's not reading it, to review the ballot, update the ballot, and it's a fully audible system. So if you were to review the ballot, see that it's not picking up on it because they use a pencil, then you would be able to, as a reviewer, update the vote so that they match the ballot. But that is a fully audible system, so if anyone else were to go back and look at it, they would see that that ballot corresponds with that update that was made.
Thank you. Just one last question. Will the votes to be counted by after vote?
We are currently exploring other options outside of the AccuVote system for a vote by mail jurisdiction. Most of the other jurisdictions outside of Alaska are using high-speed scanners and a more fully audible system to better track the vote cast.
Right, and not just mention after because that's what we have right now, but just it'll be a tracking similar thing.
More advanced technology.
Right.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Mr. Cheney, I'll just add on to what Amanda said to Ms. Gray Jackson, is that our current system says use a black pen, and people don't use a black pen, and we have ways of manually addressing that. That's a system that's just going to follow over into the new system.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr.
That
Chairman.
goes to our system, maybe we run it from the state, so we have to see where the state goes. Mr. Flynn, sir.
Yeah, it was actually the ink question came to mind. It's not a partisan choice. It's my banking institution. I like blue ink. So I'm glad you raised that, Ray Jackson. Couple of other things, though. Do any jurisdictions use like a business reply envelope? You know, where we pay the
We pay the
postage
charge.
and it's cost lower on a per unit basis.
We are currently working with the United States Postal Service. I'm really grateful to have the postmaster on our stakeholders group, and we've been able to get some good information so far. But we are having that conversation about the cost to mail back using a business reply. And we'll bring forward the cost to the assembly of doing that versus the Dropbox or stamp model. It's my understanding every jurisdiction that we've explored so far, and I'm kind of glancing over at Jackie because she is my research guru. It's my understanding that no jurisdiction pays for the return of the.
Okay, I think that would be an attractive option to explore. It's simple and your per unit cost tends to be lower, and we'll be saving money on not having all these precincts all over creation. It
Might increase the response, Mr. Flynn.
Yeah.
We pay for that.
Yeah. And then I guess just a brief comment that you addressed, Mr. Trainee. I'm much more comfortable with the vote by mail model than the electronic model. just because of the signature verification and because it's an established process based on our existing absentee voter system. And I know I'm a Luddite, and I actually do have a bunch of stamps. But I appreciate taking this step first, and then we can think about further iterations. How does this look like it's going to affect the service area elections from your perspective?
We've worked
We're
close.
exploring.
I'm harassing Jennifer here.
We are already a step ahead of you. We're having meetings with our service organizations.
It's actually scheduled.
So two components. We are working to address the service areas separate of the election, but we've worked really closely with ALU's GIS Center of Excellence, and they have helped us get to a point where we are able to, based on municipal tax districts, compare that to the state voter registration database and determine which ballot someone would be eligible for. So we ran a pilot project this year. It was the first year that we did it. So we sent to all of our precincts that are split precincts, we sent them both the maps that they've been accustomed to using, along with the additional book that had which ballot that voter is qualified for. So we are very close to being at a spot where we would be able to fully automated, be able to run those two databases, make them talk to each other, and identify which ballots that voter should receive.
That's great. I hate to get a third wood ballot. And the final question is, where and how would you operate a call center? As referenced in the video here.
We have election workers that work closely with the clerk's office, and we would set up a call center with those election workers, and we would use some of our space within either the clerk's office or some of the other rooms that we use throughout City Hall.
So it'd be here.
Yeah.
It could be here. We've looked at other options too. We've talked about space at the Denina. We've talked about space at the Egan. We've talked about space at the Eagle River Town Center. You know, every space is slightly problematic because supervision becomes an issue the farther away we get from City Hall. Security becomes an issue because if we have any live ballots, it's 24/7 security that we have to pay for. But with a call center, we would have some options. So those would be, we would be exploring the least expensive options to make it the most effective.
Has the Emergency Operations Center been a consideration?
It was not. What a great idea.
Given the proximity and the fact that they have a lot of phone lines.
Right, and through the chair, another option might be the training room on the 7th floor. So we'll continue to explore those and make a note of that. Thank you, Mr. Quinn.
That's all I had, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Dombrowski, you're adjourned by Mr. Peterson. Open meeting, sir.
Thank you. This has been something I've actually been very positive about since I had started. I think it's a good direction to start going in. So I apologize for being late ahead of doctor's appointment. But I have a couple questions, and you may have covered this, so I apologize in advance. So one of the things that we're relying our mailing list on is the state database for voter registration. I can't say who, but there is somebody very involved at the state that I've been talking to about this issue. And I might mess up the number, but they were telling me within the municipality of Anchorage that they know of approximately 1,700 bad addresses. That's a problem. So how do we, okay, so can you please address that for me, because that's a lot of voters, and we need to make sure the state database is accurate before we make a big transition like this.
We've been working through the chair really closely with the GIS Center for Excellence, and we have been taking the state voter registration database and evaluating that against municipal information, municipal addresses, and our municipal tax districts. And we are really close to being able to address all the concerns with the bad addresses. So a lot of it is people who have mile 114 of the Stewart Highway as their address, but that's no longer recognized as the correct address. So we have worked with GIS and will continue to work with them through this process as how to reconcile those discrepancies. last time we worked with them, it was almost 98% that they were able to reconcile. So then there was a couple hundred that would just need to be gone through one by one, which would be something that we would be able to do before we would go full vote on that.
So earlier, Ms. Timboski, if you wouldn't mind, Amanda said that we have 3 requests in our technology area. One is signature verification, the second was barcoding, ballot scanning, the third was reconciliation of the state's database to municipal tax districts, that's the GIS. We need experts in this area of volunteers, and again, we'll follow up by email on that, but that's the issue that we do need some assistance on.
Okay, and then, yeah, and I did make note of all those. I also
Okay.
equipment, that's the fourth one. So when we originally started having this conversation, I remember you went down to another location out of state and you looked at their center. So are you proposing to create our own voter center?
So we went and looked at King County and Washington. And King County has over 1 million registered voters. So they are on a little bit of a different scale than Anchorage with our 290,000 registered voters. But I think we would look at using some of the space that we have and rearranging it. So currently we have conference room 105, which has our equipment that we need for our 122 polling locations. So we have bags, pens. We won't need that stuff on that level, so we could move all that out of there, and that room could become more of a centralized processing room.
Okay, and I'm not saying, I'm prefacing my comment, this is not meant to be mean or critical, but maybe a little concerning. After the last 2 elections, we had 2 different times, both elections, we had to go back and recertify because ballots were found after the fact. And that was just a mayoral race and a runoff. I personally am not going to be comfortable moving forward until we have a secure location that is dedicated to doing this. Because if we can't handle a mayor's race and a runoff to go to a full by mail ballot without having a dedicated state space, I think you're just inviting error. So I think part of giving the clerk's office the tools they need to be successful is having a real dedicated space. You don't have to shift ballots here and shift ballots here and somebody forgot a bag there. Because I know if it's my vote, I want to make sure it's shown. And, until that's completely, and I know there were processes that were put in place to address that issue, but if we had that issue in just early and absentee voting, there's no way I'm going to commit to going full scale city until we know you guys have the adequate space, that you have a functioning flow, that you can account for every single ballot.
Through the chair, Ms. Dimbalski, we agree that part of the problem was lack of space and the constant shifting of the rooms. And we agree that needs to be addressed before we do this. And I will tell you, one of the things that we're currently working on, we have the procedure subcommittee as well as Jackie, Amanda, I, and other people are working on documenting the current procedures. We are also looking at the other jurisdictions' procedures, and we're going to make sure, Jackie and Amanda have been to the Valley. Amanda's going to the lower 48 next week. We're going to get that resolved. Space is going to be an issue. It's complicated by the fact that if we leave this building, we don't have the locks that we have on this building, we're paying for security 24/7. And that's just a dilemma that we'll get to and have to address.
And I would think, like in King County, you were talking about before, they have cameras everywhere. So you can document and you know who's touching what ballots. There's no question. I think that's a huge part of giving the public comfort that they know there's no shenanigans going on. And I wouldn't say that on behalf of the clerk's office. I have full faith and confidence there's no shenanigans. But, whenever we start talking about changing something so fundamental as a vote, I think the more security we can give, the better. 2 more questions.
This was only a half-an-hour meeting, so
I know.
we're running over time.
This is an important one, though, isn't it? So 2 other questions, really quick. I'm sure they can be answered. So if somebody changes their address in 2 weeks before the election, is there still going to be a location where they can go and vote in person?
we talked at the beginning, and I showed a video which also documented King County. A lot of vote by mail jurisdictions use accessible vote centers with an opportunity if you damage your ballot, need a new one, or anything else, you're able to go there and.
Perfect. And then the last thing is what's your time frame? Where are we looking? Are we 2 years out? Are we 3 years out? Are we 5 years out? What do we think?
That's, yeah. Okay.
Or do you want to answer that question?
I am, and then we can wrap this up really quick. We're 1 year out, 2017 is the date we're shooting for, to go to a mail-in election. The Ethics and Election Committee will be bringing a resolution prior to the end of this year to come before the body that we are going to move to a mail-in election in 2017. Once we bring that before the body and it passes, then we will, prior to the next election, we'll actually bring forth, there's a couple of things we have to change in code in doing it, relatively minor, but then we'll do that part. Our whole idea behind this is by getting this done ahead of this year's election, then when we mail out the election booklet this year, the information will be in there to let everybody know that in 2017 we're doing a mail-in election.
Good, Ernie, thank you, sir. One comment, I know, Patrick, my comment on electronic voting, but how many people put in for their PhD this year electronically through My Alaska? The system exists out there to do it. It's a matter of how do we get
longer
that
are we gonna
system
have
to
a
do it on
US
voting?
Postal Service?
You what, Jennifer?
How much longer are we gonna have a US Postal Service?
Good question. Do you have any questions now before we move on? Okay.
And one other thing I should add, we can actually, the body could actually do this by resolution with no public testimony. The intention is we will introduce it, then we're going to have it held over and bring it forward for public testimony.
I think that's a wise decision.
Yeah.
Well, this work session is over. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.